I really hate trying to schedule a doctor's appointment. I'd like to do it through the patient portal, but it only allows me to make a general request. Why is it I can't schedule a doctor's appointment the way I book a restaurant reservation? Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the Health Biz podcast, where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Jeff Gartland, CEO of Relatient, a patient engagement platform that specializes in self scheduling. Do you like this show? If so, please subscribe and leave a review or maybe at least schedule one for later. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the Health Biz podcast.
Thanks for having me, David. Glad to be here.
I love what you're doing. So we'll talk about what you're doing now, but I want to hear about what led up to it, starting with your childhood, your background. What was your childhood like? Any influences that have stuck with you through your career?
Oof. Okay. Childhood. So I am the fortunate beneficiary of being born to two behavioral psychologists. So I grew up taking psych tests about who I was and what my interactions would be with other people from the time I could ever remember. Both of my parents were executive coaches. So dinner at my house consisted of usually pulling up the latest, organization that they were working with and looking at their C-suite and talking about who was doing what and what they could be doing better as a team, or, who wasn't working well with somebody else. And so, high degree of influence in terms of my leadership style, how I work with teams, honestly, how I approach, life in general and kind of my interactions, whether those are professional or personal. But that was a big part of my youth growing up.
And
Um,
Jess, so for that, did you have siblings, or was it just you at the table getting the consultation every night?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I do have a sibling. My older brother is a physician, so which actually was kind of the march into healthcare for me, David, was that my my brother would constantly talk about, some challenge or something that was going on in the healthcare industry. I grew up as a technology nerd, so I was the computer nerd in the family. And I just always tell him, like, that doesn't sound like a problem. I could fix
Yeah.
that. I could do this. I could build that. Right. And so I naively jumped head in to the pool of healthcare, digital health. And I realized really quickly, David, that this is not a technology issue. It's a human change management behavioral issue. So I've spent the last 25 years now trying to fix people, even though I claim it's actually building technology. So
No, that's fair enough. Well, you're being a little ironic about having two psychologists as parents, but I'll say you're lucky to be spared having two psychiatrists as parents, because at least your parents didn't have that prescription pen to write any weird stuff. Because I know some people that were in that position. All right, so jumping into various technologies and stuff, give me just a sort of brushstrokes of your career before Relatient. What was any sort of common threads to that, or
yeah,
how did it progress there?
yeah. I did some technology startups when I was in college. So the classic internet boom, and lot of that focus was actually in on visualization and being able to bring consumer goods onto the internet and allow people to shop and buy things in a much more sophisticated fashion. So I lived through the boom and bust of the internet days. Uh, Took that and kind of fell into the healthcare digital health space coming out of graduate school. Worked with a lot of health systems around turnarounds and complex scenarios where there was a lot of challenge between the inpatient health system and hospital, and what does that do for their physician service line. So I spent a lot of time working with specialty groups, orthopedists, women's health, neurology, so on, and cardiac, so on and so forth, really trying to design incentive models that helped physicians perform, but also help the system as a whole deliver good care and quality of care and good experiences. And so that really shaped my view on healthcare. And I got lucky enough to fall into a role with McKesson, which at the time was really an aggregator of almost everything that you can imagine across the digital health space. So we had acquired usually not just one, but two or three of almost
Yeah.
every asset, right? We had the fun stuff. And so I was doing M&A and business development for them, which allowed for me to really see kind of the full breadth of the healthcare landscape, got groomed up through general management, and then worked with Ciox, now Datavant, for a number of years, led that through a couple of real big growth transitions. I spent some time on the dark side with Anthem and Elevance. I was leading our what's now called Carelon business, and so I did a lot around payment integrity and prior authorization, which was really helpful to to kind of understand how payers interact with the ecosystem. I'd always sold to health plans and worked with them, but being on the inside really helped kind of shape my view. But ultimately, David, I realized at the end of the day, my passion is really around helping providers and consumers of healthcare. And Relatient came along, and it was just really a perfect match for me.
That sounds good. Well, you talk about the dark side, the health plans. Of course, I don't disagree, but they always are having like these elevating names, like Elevance, Carolyn. Like it sounds so wonderful. Although there's some other ones that they have like point 32, where you wonder like what is that? It's like doesn't really make any sense. Some sort of obscure reference. Well, nonetheless, it's good to get you over to relation. So let's talk about patient scheduling, and let's leave relation out for a minute and just talk about like how is scheduling typically done today, and also tell me if we're talking about like if I should be thinking about scheduling with a physician in their office, or should we think more broadly? But how is scheduling done now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, at the top, I know you kind of said it tongue in cheek in terms of why can't it be like booking a restaurant reservation? But could you imagine going on Open Table and instead of just picking your restaurant and your time of day and the size of your party, they asked you things like, "What did you have last time you were here? What
Yeah.
table did you sit in? Did you pay by credit card or cash? Did you like your meal? Which waiter served you?" All of these kinds of additional questions that get injected into healthcare booking that are very different than, let's say, a hotel or a restaurant or an airline ticket. And so the reason for that is because providers are inundated with a bunch of other things that are downstream from the activity of scheduling that are impacted by that. Insurance is one of those, but there's also aspects around, what does that experience need to get set up for? Do I need other resources in the room? Are you going to need multiple appointments back to back to back? Is it something where it's going to be a sequential thing? How many authorizations do you have? There's just a slew of these things, not to mention the provider preferences, which come into play around, I will see this, won't see that. I prefer hands, but I'll also work on elbows. All of those kinds of nuances that come into play. And so, honestly, what happens today, for the most part, is that's all managed with 3-ring binders, post it notes, whiteboards, other kinds of things in a contact center. Where when you're picking up the phone as a consumer and you're calling a doctor and saying, "Hey, can I come in to see you?" That person on the other end of the line is navigating that binder and all of those post-it notes to try and adjudicate what is the right time, what's the next available, who is the right physician, what are the other things that I need to bring into account as it relates to that process. And so it's very manual right now still, which is kind of crazy. Um,
So
what
you're
we're
talking
doing,
about something, where there's a lot of things that have to be taken into account beyond insurance. But let's say even for a simple example, because it sounds like you're letting these practices off the hook at the moment. But let me not do that. So if I'm going to go for a uh, my annual physical, okay, with a physician that I've been seeing for a while, and I want to do it on the portal, because guess what? They're only open, a few hours a day. If I call, I'm going to be on hold. I just want to go on my portal like I do anything else. And if I want to schedule something, I can only make like a scheduling request. And they're like, "Do you
yeah,
prefer Wednesdays or Thursdays?" It's very general, so that they have
yeah.
to get back to me. And I don't give them credit that they have to figure out all that stuff. Seems to me that they don't actually want me to see their schedule and to be able to work with it. Is that a factor too?
It absolutely is. It usually has a tendency to be because of these other downstream factors, though. And so, what has happened over time is it's kind of like a road where you keep filling the pothole over and over and over again. And then you step back and say, "Why is the road so bumpy?"
Yeah.
Well, it's because you haven't actually repaved the road, right? And so, this is a little bit of that aspect, David, where the reason why most provider groups will decide not to open up for more patient access, or they will inhibit that access through request forms like what you just articulated, is because they're afraid or scared that they are going to book the wrong type of patient for the wrong type of provider at the wrong location and create a different type of patient satisfaction issue. It's a funny stat. We did this one about a year and a half ago, and it's almost like 90% of patients want more ability to schedule appointments online. Like the example that you just talked about, 90% of patients want it,
Yeah.
but it's only 84% of physicians that are limiting the ability for patients to do that. So only 16% are allowing it. And it's really wild when you think about that discrepancy. And I think a lot of it does have to come down, David, to the the fear factor of, do I get the wrong person in on the wrong time, and then how do I deal with that downstream. And so what we've been doing and kind of focusing on is, let's find the balance between those two, and how do we pull all of those issues up front and make it in a way that's really easy and conducive for the consumer to have a great experience, but the provider to be excited and confident that they're not going to end up with a booking error. And that balance it's not easy, but that balance is really what kind of started in the genesis of what is Relation.
And so, how much of this is a kind of a technology problem to be able to deal with all those things? Because the nice thing about a three-ring binder is, at least I can flip through it. I can make a note on the page, and it doesn't like
Mhm.
crash or give me 404 error or something like that. How much is the technology versus how much is sort of the stuff from sitting around your parents' table, and it's more the provider doesn't want to do this, or they think there's going to be this issue, and they have to kind of work through and really understand the issues, and maybe it's some other issue.
No, it's a good balance between the two, to be quite honest, David. I'd say that, you got to have the right technology in place, because what we've also found is those that will even open up for some level of online scheduling, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll limit it down or put in front of the consumer things that they can't really do or understand. So as an example, are you a new patient or are you an existing patient?
Yeah,
Well, in your definition, you might be existing because you went to that practice before.
yeah,
But in the practice's view, you're new because you went and saw a different doctor last time, not the doctor that you're booking to now. Or it was more than 3 years ago. And so therefore you're now considered a new patient again because they haven't seen you for 3 years. So even just a simple definition of, are you a new or existing patient, is actually a discrepancy between what the consumer believes and what the practice may believe. So there is some basics of scheduling that do require the technology to be smart enough and sophisticated enough to understand those kinds of things. Once you have that technology built and developed and laid out, it 100% becomes a conversation with the physician, both the clinical side as well as the operating and financial sides of that practice, in terms of how do they want to run their business, what are the rules that they want to set up, what level of flexibility, where do they want to draw the line between open access to consumers or more precision for the physicians. And so that really does become the latter part of your balancing act, which is, it's change management at that point.
okay, so obviously you have a solution. They thought through all these issues, or not of all of them, then almost all of them. If you're selling to me as a practice owner, a practice manager, what's your value proposition to me? Why would I want to bring your solution in house?
More appointments.
Okay,
There you go. More appointments. So, um, it's not atypical, David, for a specialty physician to have 25, 30, 40% non-utilized time on their calendar.
yeah,
And at the same time, the average wait time for a patient to get in to see that same specialist, maybe 30 days, 40 days.
yeah,
Um, and the conflict between those two really does come down to being able to balance the supply and demand of these two equations. And so, at the end of the day, what we do and what our system does is, it allows for that provider group to get more appointments in. It allows for the patients that are out there seeking care, wanting to find you or get booked, to get there quickly and conveniently. And in that same study that we did, about a year ago, one of the things that was really interesting, this will come to the kind of an approach around how we've rebuilt our self-scheduling workflow. What we found was that the definition of convenience for consumers is really in the eye of the beholder.
yeah.
So if you ask consumers, what is it that you're looking for when you're searching to book a medical appointment, it's about equally distributed between those that, I know the exact doctor I want to go see and I need to book with that doctor. I know the type of doctor that I want to go see, but I don't have a specific name. I know the time of day that I need to be able to go see a doctor because I've got work or, dropping off the kids at school. But I need any doctor, but it needs to be within this time of day and which day of week I want to go see. And so when you split that up, what you realize is that consumers, their concept of convenience really does vary based on the dynamics that they need to deal with in their lives. And so what we've been really working on when it comes to self-scheduling is how do we allow for really rapid access and capture of that eyeball when somebody comes to your website and says, yes, I want to book with you. How do I get them into that flow of picking a time as quickly as possible, regardless of how they're searching? Am I searching by name, searching by day of week, searching by location? Any of those things are viable, but you've got to get to that consumer convenience factor as quickly as possible.
So let me go back to what you said before about the practice having, I think you said 30 or 40% of kind of
Mhm.
unused clinical time, and try to relate that to somebody who, is like literally trying to book with them. And then they hear that, they're booking out 6 or 8 weeks or whatever. Now, I know there's a lot of no shows because if I have a need for a specialist, and in 8 weeks, I'm either going to have gone somewhere else, I'm going to be dead, I didn't need it, or I forgot about it. So I understand where they have a bunch of no shows, but they're literally trying to like fill up their schedules and aren't able to do that. Is
Yes.
that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So simple examples. Let's say in that 3-ring binder, somebody says, don't book back to back new patients in the morning because it causes me issues where I'm going to compound it and in the afternoon I get backed up.
Yeah.
It's a simple idea, makes sense on paper, right? Well, if I've got an open time slot and one of those was a new patient and there's another new patient that wants to come in, but I as the contact agent, I look in that 3-ring binder and it says no back to back news. So guess what I'm not going to do? I'm not
Right.
booking that new patient back in that time slot, even though at a certain point in time for that physician, the better decision would be to go ahead and fill that slot and deal with the downstream impact of it rather than leave it open.
Yeah.
But that rule was designed or written into the binder in such a way that you've now created an inventory that's unusable. And I kind of like to think about the calendar for a physician similar to the seats on the airplane.
I thought you were going to use that example. Yeah.
Yeah, once it takes off, it's gone.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain point in time where, yes, maybe ideally, I don't want those back-to-back new patients, but if I'm sitting 3 days out, 2 days out, a day out, and I've got the opportunity to fill that seat, you should take the opportunity to fill that seat.
All right. So I wanted to ask you about the patient experience. You've told me a little bit about, getting into like what do the patients actually care about. Some care about the time of day. Some care about this general practice. Some care about this, that, and the other. And it sounds like you can accommodate that. I understand how that could work with some criteria. How does it work if you're dealing with, let's say, a physician is making a referral somewhere else? Um,
Yeah,
I had this experience of being referred to a surgeon who it turned out was on vacation for a long time, and I had to end up, navigating, which I can do, and I'm not the typical patient, but how do you deal with this issue of a referral as opposed to, hey, I want to book, let's say, with my primary care, which was the previous example I gave.
sure. Don't you love being the mule of all of your information and the referral sheet too? It's like, here you go, David. You handle it, right?
Yeah.
Here's some phone numbers you can start calling and see who can see you. Um, our approach to referrals is one where uh, we try and take it in a more consumer centric or behavioral nudging
Yeah.
orientation. So what we do is when we're doing a referral, we actually stub out the entire appointment booking process, other than which time and day do you want to select as the consumer. So we know which provider or provider options you're being sent to, why you're getting sent there, what appointment type that is for that particular provider. All of the details around that appointment are already stubbed out. And then what we do is we actually initiate what we call a referral task. And that ultimately ends up in a text message to the provider or to the consumer's phone. And when the consumer goes onto that and validates their identity, they are presented very simply with which time, location, and day do you want to see them. And it's real time inventory, real time booking. When that consumer selects the time, they are booked and calendared on the referring provider. So that's a very oriented way to do it. I kind of chuckled earlier when you were talking about portals. uh, we've taken a stance of being portalless. We
Yeah.
we don't agree with the concept of putting portal walls around a consumer experience. I mean, I'm a relatively healthy individual, and I think I've got 7 or 8 different portal
Yeah.
logins between my primary care, my dermatologist, and my kids' pediatric folks. And so it's like that portal sprawl is just a disaster from my perspective on a consumer experience, and we don't see that in any of our other daily lives. So you can validate and confirm and be HIPAA compliant in a portalless fashion. And that's how we kind of approach that referral process. Is we're not going to put it behind portals and make it all, paywalled behind things. Just make it something that's easy for the consumer. Stub out the appointment. We know what they need to go see and who they need to go see it. The only thing that the consumer should have to answer is what day and time do I want to be there?
The provider preferences you mentioned before kind of expressed within the binder. How do you take that same sort of a feel that I want to be able to give my new patient enough time so that I don't give a bad experience to the next person, which is a reasonable thing to express in the type of rule that you
Yep.
described. Can they take those some sort of ideas and business principles and personal preferences and get them into your system? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's how they set up. So at implementation, we set all of those up. Um, the real fun part of the job, David, and this is where the behavior change comes into, is who gets to make the decision on what those rules are. Is
Yeah.
it each individual doctor? Is it the practice location? Is it the entity that owns and runs them, whether that's a private equity backed kind of PPM MSO, whether that's a health system or a health plan? The governance around who makes those rules and how you approach it is really where the sport begins.
Nice. All right. Well said. I know the answer to the question about if it's a private equity backed such and such. I can tell you the answer to that. I don't need to be a magician
Yeah.
or mind reader. Okay, so now how? So we're talking about sort of online, but also you have a call in approach too, and these can coexist, right? So I might like to do something online. If I don't see what I want, I might need to call, or I might call first, or I made an appointment online and now I'm driving home from work and I need to call. How do those mesh?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the kind of brilliant things that it happened before I got here, so I can call it brilliant because I
Right.
didn't have to come up with it. But um, our kind of core platform and the rules engine that's built into it is the same regardless. So if you pick up the phone and call, all of the same rules that get managed through that call center are the same things that you would see if you went online and scheduled. So it's the same process, it's the same rules, it's the same management and governance of those. The only difference is really, do you make it consumer friendly or do you make it more staff facing friendly? So maybe perhaps there's a question where you phrase it in a little bit more general terms rather than clinical terms, as an
Yeah.
example of where you could adjust those things. We've also now opened that up to chat automation, so you can go through those same rules and that same process through automation of a chat. And we've now opened that up via API as well. So we've got clients that are using us where it's running all of the rules and it's managing all of that, but it's their interface, it's their app, and they're just simply leveraging us via API interface.
Here's a problem I had recently, which was that I was trying to call this, trying to get an appointment with a surgeon, and they're booking way out. The reason I thought they were on vacation is not because they initially told me, but because after I was in touch with them a few times, I found out that's one reason they weren't there. But I said, well, like, do you have like a cancellation list or something? Because to your point, there should be things that
Yep.
that come up, last minute deals, whatever it may be.
Yep.
And they're like, no, but you can keep calling. And I thought that was insane. I just
Yeah,
felt,
no, we use what we call a automated wait list. It's a pretty important feature, but essentially what an automated wait list does, David, is I'm looking for consumers, patients that match the same kind of profile. So in your case, let's say you were going in and getting a knee surgery or something. Hey, is there anybody else that has the same appointment type, the same surgeon? And we maintain that wait list and we automate it in such a way where, again, portalless, and it's not a phone call, but we will send you a text message and say, hey, an appointment just came up at this time, this date. Would you like to select it? And
yeah,
we give you a set amount of time. And if you respond yes, that spot's been moved to you.
great.
We'll cancel your old appointment, move you, put you in the new appointment, and run it from there. If you say no, or it took you too long to respond to it, it'll move on to the next person, the next person. So it's a very good way. Again, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're adding appointments to the calendar because we're just constantly combing through that information in order to maximize that balance between supply and demand.
A lot of the things that you describe, sound very rule based, and they may lend themselves also to some use of AI, not just to dress things up for your investor, which I'm sure you could do anyway, but they are those sort of things like an intention that's expressed as a specific rule. Perhaps the system can learn, and you can use AI. Do you make use of AI?
Actual intelligence, yes, we are actually intelligent. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we are leveraged. We're beginning to leverage AI. I think the one thing, and I shared this on a conversation I was having the other day, and I truly do believe this, is that look, if you're a provider and the first thing that somebody does is comes to you and says, "Hey, I've got this great AI thing, you should buy it,"
Yeah,
um, I would run. I wouldn't just walk. I would run. AI is a tool. It's not it's not the tool, right? And so you really, at the end of the day, you got to understand what is the problem that you're trying to solve. What's the job to be done? What is the challenge that is there? And there are instances where AI is the right tool to go and leverage against that. And I think you rightly pointed out that, hey, the sophistication of these rules could probably be an area where AI is leverageable. And that's an example of one that we have been playing around with, is as an example, rather than simply saying, hey, I don't want to have more than 20 Medicare patients in a month. That's a very deterministic rule.
right.
The second it becomes 21, the answer is no. That's not really the intent of that type of a rule. The intent is to say, hey, I want to understand what is my total balance between commercial, Medicaid, Medicare. You picked 20 as a generalized number. AI can get smarter about that and flex it up and down in a much more dynamic fashion. So it's an example of where we are thinking about it and leveraging AI, David. But I'll tell you, to be honest, even just internal use cases within our business are ripe for use of that, even rather than, I know we naturally always think about how do we put it into a product and how do we
Yeah,
sell more things with it, but just getting more efficient on our own internal activities, implementation processes and documentation of our code releases, and how do we handle support tickets from our clients? Like all of those kinds of things are good use cases for us to leverage it, where it's not necessarily a product, but it's actually, how do we become more efficient as a business, and then hopefully leverage that so that we can continue to bring and innovate more products for our clients.
well, I will not label you as the AI self-scheduling platform, so let it be known. Not this year, anyway. Good. Well, the final question I have for you, Jeff, is about any book recommendations. If you read any good books lately, anything you might recommend to our audience, and conversely, if you read something that was a real waste of time, let us know about that too.
Oh, okay. Um, I've read two books recently. They're kind of counterbalancing. So one was the Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, which was kind of an interesting book, um, kind of talking about the level of preparation and specificity that you need to have if you're going to be an astronaut, and then how do you apply that to kind of life in both professional and personal life. The kind of crux of that one is to really focus in on the details and actually kind of think negatively.
Yeah,
Think worst case scenario, because something could go wrong at any point in time. Um, but use that in a positive way, in the sense of building plans around what ifs. And so that was kind of an interesting. And then the counterbalance to that one was a what's the book? The subtle art of how to not give an F, right?
okay,
And so it's a little bit of counter to it. It's a little irreverent of a book, but
yeah.
it's also one that basically says, hey, you life is short. You got to focus in on the details, like I said in the first recommendation. But at the end of the day, you can only care about too many things at once, and so make sure you're spending your time on the things that are worth caring about versus wasting too much time on the things that are out of your control. So those are the two. It's kind of a yin and a yang for me.
All right. No, that sounds very good. Well, that's it for yet another episode of the Health Biz Podcast. I've been speaking today with Jeff Gartland. He's CEO of Relatient. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me today on the Health Biz Podcast.
Thanks, David.
You've been listening to the Health Biz Podcast with me, David Williams, President of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.